Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first meeting of this Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee in the new municipal year. The first item is election of chair. Is there a nomination?
I'd like to nominate Catherine Glover.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Caroline?
I'd like to second Catherine Glover.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations?
I think as Catherine's already announced in the Swallow newsletter that she's been appointed to the job. She has been appointed. Who else wants to go with that?
I'm taking that as no other nominations. Can I then please have a show of hands in support of the proposal? Okay, over to you, Catherine.
Nominations for a vice chair, please. Caroline.
I'd like to nominate Mark Bruno Walker, please.
Seconder. I'll second. Thank you, Beth. Can we have a show of hands to Mark? Oh, I didn't ask if there were any other nominations. Okay. Welcome, Mark. I'm going to go back to the beginning and read out the reminder of the role of overview and scrutiny, which is to provide an independent, critical friend, challenge to work with the council's executive and other public service providers for the benefit of the public. The committee considers submissions from a range of sources and reaches conclusions based on the weight of evidence, not on party political grounds. Are there any apologies?
We have an apology from Adrian Mather, and Lou Timlin is here as a substitute chair.
Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting. Have we got any comments on the minutes of the meeting from people who were here? Hands for accepting the minutes? It's Pauline, me, Alison. That's it. Okay, minutes are approved. Right. Okay, agenda item 9. Oh no, are there any questions? Oh, declarations of interest. Sorry, didn't turn back to the beginning.
I'd like to register a declaration of interest, please, Chairman. I work for Boom Credit Union, which is mentioned in the papers.
Any more? Okay, are there any questions?
No public questions and no member questions, Chair.
Okay. So it's agenda item 8. 8? Yes, agenda item 8. Leader and Chief Executive who are going to give us a presentation.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to the committee for inviting us to come and give you this presentation. I'm going to assume that you've had a look at the papers that were circulated earlier, so we'll keep our comments fairly brief, so there's enough time for you to ask any questions you may wish to ask. I think Susan and I are going to try and do a double act on this, and how smoothly that will go is anyone's guess. Just on the first page of the presentation, after the title page, you can see just a brief summary of some of the challenges the council faces and also the ways in which we've been trying to address those challenges. Do you want to add anything, Susan, on that?
If I can add that, it will be of no surprise that the challenges around sort of like demand for our services remain around children's and adults and also housing as well, and that our communities continue to actually feel the impact of the cost of living crisis, so that has a real sort of impact on as I say, on the demand for our services. Though at the same time, what's really important as a council is that we actually respond with innovation and partnership, and at the same time we need to make savings as well. So this financial year we have targeted savings of just under 12 million. So there are considerable financial challenges in terms of the savings that we need to make. But as I say, what is equally important is that we continue to still think about innovation. We don't batten down hatches, and we work across the council and with our partners in responding. And some of the presentation here talks about the work that we're expanding around the work with the Reading University and also our voluntary sector partners. And in particular, we've chosen just to finish in terms of this on this particular slide. We've really focused organisationally on the things that are really costing us money. So, for example, we looked at sort of the data and found that in terms of the challenges around children and adults, it was the placement costs. So that's placements in settings for, say, children who are in care or who have special needs, and those particular placements cost a lot. And what we've really focused on organisationally is actually sourcing our own specialist accommodation, and so that we can reduce the actual cost of placements. So we're really, I want to sort of demonstrate to you that we're really honing in on our information, on our data, and then coming up with solutions to that, but working across the organisation in doing so.
Thank you, Susan. Just very briefly to add that 2 points really, one on the pressures side and the other on the way we're trying to address them side. On the pressures side, it's worth emphasising that for Wokingham, and this has historically been the case over many, many years, we received the least core revenue support from central government of any unitary authority. So any authority that has to provide adults and children's social care, which is by far our biggest area of spend. The two together comprise 2/3 of our total spend. So the challenge there is that the government's current way of allocating core revenue support is based almost wholly on indices of socioeconomic deprivation. And Wokingham doesn't, unsurprisingly, score very highly on those indices. We have areas of poverty and deprivation, but on average, we are a wealthy borough. And the average, you could argue, is skewed by some very wealthy people living in the borough, but we are, by those indices, not a council that needs a lot of support from government. But of course, the challenge is that adults and children's social care are statutory services that are not means tested and are essentially, they are going to have to be provided by councils, whether they're in an area of wealth or an area of poverty. It doesn't really much matter in terms of the complexity and the expense of providing those services. In some ways, in fact, there is some evidence which suggests that councils in relatively affluent areas have a bigger challenge with adults and children's services, not a lesser one. So that's worth emphasising. And in addition to the points that Susan was making about a new emphasis on working much more collaboratively within the council, so that we try and adopt a more joined up approach to the way we tackle what are truly corporate problems rather than see them as departmental or directorial problems, recognise their corporate problems. We're also trying to look outwards and work much more constructively and effectively with external partners. And it is tempting when times are tough to just try and look inwards, to batten down the hatches, as you put it, Susan. We're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to embrace the opportunities that come with working with others. So whether that's the voluntary and charitable sector, as you highlighted, Susan, the University of Reading, with which we've formed a new strategic partnership. And it's also worth saying with other councils. So we have, together with the other Berkshire councils, formed the Berkshire Prosperity Board as a means of increasing our chances of getting central government funding for big infrastructure projects that cut across the boundaries between these authorities. So I just wanted to make those points. I don't think we need to go at great length about making an impact. I don't particularly want to talk much about this, although I'd love to, of course, talk at great length about the new Twyford Library opening, but I won't, I promise. So do you want to?
Yeah, I probably would like to make some because I'm really enthusiastic about
Well,
it. I know you are as well. I know you are as well. But it's in terms of just talking about sort of like the fact that it's really important for innovation and that we don't, we really don't sort of spend a lot of time looking at inwards. That first one, which is signing up to the Social Care Futures Charter, is really about co-production with people who've got lived experience with disabilities, physical or learning disabilities, and so it's really fantastic that we've got that co-production of that charter and have that vision with our communities. And at the same time, we've also got the fact that we've become a Marmot borough. So I know, Stephen, you'll talk about that in a moment, but again, it's actually saying, we're still actually looking to improve and do more despite the financial challenges that the council faces. And I think if I go sort of to February in this little slide deck, it talks about the fact that we've seed funded a local community food store, which I'm sure a number of you are well familiar with, because I know you're nodding your heads, which I think, again, is real sort of like fantastic impact on our communities. So it's very much, for me, it's where voluntary sector leading and actually we're empowering residents as part of that as well. And I think the only other one that I wanted to mention, or probably a couple, is the care home. So going back to this point about placements and the cost of placements, that applies to adults, that we actually purchased a care home. So, one of the reasons behind purchasing a care home is so that it actually reduces the cost of our adult placement. So again, it's real actions to reduce the cost on the council. And I think that I probably just wanted to draw out the final point, which is, I know, Stephen, you've mentioned about Twyford Library, but in June, we've got something called the Joy app, which is a social prescription software, which won a local government Chronicle award, which is really, really good. And we've been contacted by the Local Government Association to share that sort of good practice with other local authorities in the country. So it's great. It's really, again, a really good example of innovation that's really important that we have in the organisation. And similarly, I was contacted by the LGA a couple of days ago for us to be part in a discussion about climate change, as in the work that the council has done around climate change, because it was previously shortlisted for an MJ award as well. So there's the important about delivering our core business, and at the same time, we're driving that innovation.
And a key theme, and that's picked up really in some of the things you just mentioned, is well, it's three things wrapped into one. First of all, preventative work. So trying to reduce pressure downstream by intervening in a way that prevents problems occurring, which will cost a lot of money to deal with later on. early intervention, which is obviously connected with prevention work, so that you're intervening early rather than later, and again, potentially saving on costs. So the Joy app, effectively, there's some evidence about how it's impacting on the number of referrals to doctors, surgeries, and beyond that, to hospitals and so forth. And then invest to save, which is the example that you've given there, which is a really good one, is purchasing a care home. That's obviously a capital cost. It will save us in revenue in years to come, handsomely. So I think we're trying very hard to look to the future and actually engineer savings that will come down the line. It's not always possible to deliver those savings straight away, but it's important to take decisions now that will enable us to be able to continue to deliver our services to help people and save money.
And I will mention one other thing from this slide, and it's about tackling antisocial behaviour, because that's something that's really important to our communities. And that the example that's in here, which is from sort of April time, which is about the joint work that we did with the police on the Norris estate. Again, real sort of action with the police. I think we actually took quite a few sort of legal actions within that, which had a real sort of impact. So again, it's really important that we tackle that kind of thing for our residents.
One thing, if I may, the next two slides deal directly with the Marmot Borough idea or approach. And then there's a slide trying to demonstrate the ways in which the work on the community vision aligns with the Marmot approach. And then there's a return to the Marmot principles, and that takes us very nearly to the end. So I'm just going to say a little bit, if I may, about Marmot, because it's a concept that isn't always easy for everyone to get their head around. I was saying earlier on that in connection with the government's funding formula, that we are conceived to be a wealthy borough, and we certainly, in terms of health and wealth outcomes, score very highly. But a vital thing to recognise is that is on average. And averages obviously mask very considerable variations, and there are lots of people in our community who are missing out, who don't actually experience high levels of health. And we really do need to try and address that, not just for the sake of the individuals concerned, but because if we don't, we're squandering and wasting talent. There are people with talent that we need to give them the opportunity and the ability to be able to contribute to the public good through exercising their talents. Now, becoming a Marmot borough isn't a project as such; it's an approach. And it will involve quite considerable cultural change within the organisation to get people to continue doing the work that we started on, approaching things in a corporate way, recognising there are challenges that seem on the face of it to be acute in one area, but can be really quite profoundly impacted by work in other areas. So there's a kind of natural assumption, I think, that public health means the NHS. Well, actually, about 80% of the things that impact on health and well-being are actually in the council's control. They're not directly provided through the NHS. Only about 20% is really relates to the NHS. So, housing, the quality of housing, of good housing, makes an enormous difference to health. And we know if people are sick and ill, they're not contributing anywhere near as much to society as if they're fit and well and leading healthy lives. It's great for them to be in a good physical and mental state, but it's also good for all of us. So thinking about ways in which the things we do in the council impact on health will help us to address this problem of health inequalities and really the squandering of talent and ability, because people are being held back by health problems. Now, that's not to say that we're currently failing to focus on the right things, but we're not always perhaps connecting it together in the way we want to. And I think the Marmot approach will encourage us to do more of this. And we're going to work with expert advisors. The Institute of Health Equity is going to be working alongside us to determine what we need to do as a council that will help deliver better health outcomes for everyone in the borough. Now this, as I've said, I think fairly clearly, you can see on the second Marmot slide, all of the components and how they might relate to each other. On the third, you've got something that looks on the face of it to be about the community vision, or what, as we're now calling it, Wokingham Communities Vision. In recognition, there's lots of different communities in the borough. And the Wokingham Communities Vision, as most of you will know, but one or two if you won't, is essentially something we initiated about 18 months ago. It was an attempt to bring the community into the setting of the priorities for the council. So those priorities would be shaped by the community rather than imposed upon the community. And the work we've been doing on that has progressed very well. About a year ago, we formed a steering group of people from business, the voluntary sector, health providers, University of Reading, other educators, faith groups, and the Youth Council. The Youth Council has been a really important part of all this. And they've identified various areas where their aspirations are being expressed through this draft community vision, which has been put out now to public consultation and has been broadly endorsed in that consultation. Now, there's a remarkable degree of alignment, happily, between the aspirations being expressed in the draft community's vision and what the Marmot work is about. So there's we're not having to try and reconcile very divergent perspectives. They actually fit very well together. And there's the penultimate slide here just takes you through what the Marmot principles are. I'm particularly keen on Marmot because he was, or is, professor at UCL, which is where I spent my whole career. So I'm quite pleased that he's helping us. Okay, shall we move to the last slide? And this is really the next steps, and this kind of builds on what I hope by now are fairly familiar themes for you. Obviously, it is blindingly obvious, I think, that unless the council's finances are in a good situation, we can't do very much at all. I think it was a previous executive member for finance under the previous administration who very wisely said, a broke council can't help anyone. And we know quite a few councils have effectively gone broke in the last year, 18 months. They've gone into Section 114 measures, and government commissioners, have been sent in to run them. The nearest example we have is Slough. But there are others teetering on the verge of getting to that position. The consequence of that is truly dire. Wholesale reduction of services, anything that isn't statutory for the chop, and the capacity the commissioners have to double the rate of council tax above the cap that the government's imposed for other councils. So Slough has had deep cuts in services and a 10% council tax rate imposed. But we don't want that for our residents. So our number one priority is making sure we remain in a safe budgetary position despite all the pressures and challenges. And then we obviously want to carry on our work with the community's vision, the vision for the borough, which will inform the council's new council plan. And we're going to continue to work as productively and effectively as we can in partnership with more and more organisations, because in constrained financial circumstances, where the government today announced its legislative programme, a lot of very ambitious things there, a lot of things they are going to need to spend money on. I don't imagine local government is going to be very high up on their list of priorities. Whatever the goodwill in terms of improving public services may be, the NHS, defence, increasingly, these are going to be major areas of public spending, and councils are going to have to probably make do with not much more, if any. So it becomes imperative we work with others to try and maximise our impact in really constrained financial circumstances. And that's the partnership agenda. For those of you who may think it's all motherhood and apple pie or a bit of idealistic claptrap, it's very hard-headed. It's about how we maximise our reach, how we pool resources, and that's human, material and financial, to tackle the challenges we face. So that's probably all I need to say, other than the final point, which is, in many ways, the most important partnership of all for the council, is the internal one, working much more as a single corporate entity rather than as a loose confederation of departments and directorates. And I think that remains our ambition, to increase that collective buy-in to the challenges the council faces. Do you want to add anything, or is that it?
Fine.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I'd rather monopolise that.
No.
Thank you, Stephen and Susan. Are there any questions? Pauline?
Thank you very much. You talk quite a lot about health. Are the NHS bought into the Marmot principles, and are you working with them, because they're a key partner in all of this? And if they don't work to the same principles as we do, we're going to be stuffed, I would say.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They are a key partner in this regard, as in so many others. I just to put it in context, as I said, about 80% of what Marmot suggests makes for healthy communities is actually what the council does, not what the NHS does. But the NHS is certainly a major contributor. It accounts on its own for 20%. So we need to work constructively with the NHS. I can't pretend it doesn't pose challenges. Working with the NHS poses challenges. It is a massive bureaucratic organisation. Its approach doesn't always align with the approach of councils. And it is itself facing, obviously, a quite constrained financial situation. Although it may end up getting a lot more support in the next few months and years. But we are very committed to trying to make that partnership work. Of all the partnerships that we are engaged in and trying to develop and improve, I honestly believe that is the most challenging and the most difficult to pull off. But we are very committed to doing it. And I think the individual members of NHS staff management that we engage with are also committed to doing it. But it is the nature of two bureaucratic organisations trying to cooperate that there are some rough edges. I think that's an honest and open acknowledgement of the challenges. But it is important to say, there is goodwill and willingness on both sides to try and make it work, and we are going to be doing that.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I agree. It's we do work obviously with health a lot on a number of different avenues, whether it's through hospital discharge is one example where we work extensively with the hospital and health. We've got the Better Care Fund, which came to the Health and Wellbeing Board last week, where again we're working together with health. I mean, health are crucial around SEND, for example, and so we absolutely work with health. I was just literally before this meeting talking to the chief executive of Bob, the Bob ICS system, which is a huge footprint, as many of you will know, and that itself brings a complexity. That's Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, and Berkshire West. So yeah, it's not without its challenges, but we will absolutely continue to say this is what we want, but at the same time, this is what we can offer as a local authority to tackling health inequalities and actually helping with that prevention point before our residents go to use the acute services. And that's why something like a Joy app, for example, is a good thing that Stephen mentioned earlier.
What I was getting at was, do they buy into these sort of principles? Because to me, they're common sense, really. The things that everybody can buy into. And I'm just wondering if you've taken them through it and whether they understand it and agree with it.
We have, and also we are presenting to their board. So that's something that we've put on the horizon for them. I think it's this month or next month, but certainly it's something that we are talking to them anyway about. And Oxfordshire, which is another member of the Bob footprint, are actually going to be part of Marmot as well. So that also helps in terms of leverage.
I think it's fair. It's fair to say, just in answer to that last question of yours, Pauline, that the NHS is very signed up to Marmot because they can see that this could be very helpful to them. If the council is working in a way that brings better health outcomes, that reduces the pressure on their budgets. So they have a very strong incentive to make Marmot work. So, I'm optimistic in that sense. My caution or reservation about the nature of the relationship is partly on the basis of what Susan's just said. Geographically, we're working with an NHS unit that covers a bigger and a different kind of geographical area to us, and it just doesn't always match up in ways we want. But I think in terms of Marmot, for the NHS, this is very good news indeed, because it's the councils seeing how they can help in better health outcomes.
Shahid.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Couple of points and maybe one or two questions, if I may. Marmite principles, yeah, great. Some of the things which we've got here, having been said in the committee for a couple of years, they're very familiar. And we've been talking about it for some time. Giving every child the best start in life. I've heard this for years. Creating fair employment and good work for all. Tackle racism, discrimination, and their outcomes. So these items we've been discussing in the council for a long time, under one administration or the other, right, for the last couple of years as well. But we know the real challenge in my mind is always found is that devil is in the details. It's not, these are high-level aspirations which have been expressed now, but also were expressed before as well. But what tangible steps have we done towards them to actually address them? So it is how, which is to me is the most important one. I don't think anyone can disagree with them. They are good principles. But what I always find is that the details are lacking. How we gonna see those kind of hows and ways and how we would deliver it, which will give us the outcome which we desire, which all of us across all political spectrum, we want the best outcome for our, all our communities. So this is me as a question as well. Maybe, obviously it's a big question in terms of how and also in different areas, but this is what we lack. I find it lacking. and the detailed bit, how we gonna deliver this, which will give us the outcomes which we want.
Yeah, I think, sorry.
Sorry,
You hadn't
you wanna,
finished, Billy.
maybe
You
one
carry
by
on.
one, you can do
Yeah.
that, then I can couple of others as well. Second point, I'll let me say it all and then you can.
Yeah, I have to then try and remember it, but anyway, go on.
Second one, a joined up approach. Again, being on the council for a long time and having detailed discussion with Sally for a number of years as well. Idea is to work across our platform, across our departments, joined up approach, use our data insight and all the rest of it we've been discussing for a long time. But it is a journey, I understand. It's not having open overnight, but we've been on journey for some time now. So where are we on that journey? And when would we know when we actually are near to what we desired objective of joined up approach? Because otherwise we'll be talking for the next couple of years as well. And but we never know what that good looks like. Can we see that, what that good is? Are we nearly there or are we going to be still waiting for 10 years? Okay. This is sort of question which is going in my mind. The third one, you mentioned about
3. I thought you only had 2, but anyway.
Placement and cost of homes, as we mentioned as well, care home.
Right.
Just from my understanding, obviously, it's a big area to care homes and the cost for the elderly as well, as you highlighted, is large budget goes towards that. But also I see that there's a trend as well. There's a lot of people don't want to go to care homes as the ultimate last resort when they're basically, there's no other choice. A lot of people would like to stay in their own homes and get the care. Also, care homes you can provide limited spaces. Doesn't matter how big, I don't know how big the care home, this is one of the questions is how big the care homes are, how much actually saving we're going to make on the care home which we bought, or say on an annual basis. That was a question, perhaps you can respond to that. But also in tag with that is, the trend is not actually to go to care homes. This is the reports I've read, and it's people. So the packages people are waiting for at home, that is an issue, a lot of issues around that. People, how are we addressing? I would say they are the majority, and the care home actually probably the smaller number compared to that. And how are we going to address that particular sector? I'll stop at that.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, you're going to go on to another fourth one, but no, you're going to stick with the 3. 3 has a nice symmetry to it. Okay, so we start with Marmot, and your perfectly legitimate question. We've heard much of this before. What I first of all should say is I really welcome your point about consensus on this. And if there's consensus, that's a good thing. If we're all signed up to this, we all think this is a good idea, we can all agree to these principles. It's a great starting point. And let's hope that continues. There has been a recognition, I think, in the past of the importance of all these individual components. But what Marmot does, which I think is worthwhile, is pull them all together in a coherent way and focus people's attention on what can be done and how these things are all interconnected. Because we tended to look at these things in the past as individual pockets of good practice and good behaviour and not seen them as an integrated whole. And I think Marmot encourages us to do that. And I think precisely because it's doing that, it's helping us to address the second question that you came up with, Shahid, which is about joined up thinking, joined up approach, which, as you quite rightly say, we've aspired to do for a very long time. I think we are starting to do it more effectively than we've done it before. And what's the saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. The really difficult financial situation the council has been in, really for the last 2 and a bit years, since really inflation started to take off and increased our base costs. And obviously, although inflation is coming down, those base costs remain high. So we're paying a lot more for things than we were before. That, I think, has really sharpened the focus and concentrated the mind on the need to work more effectively in corporate terms. So we know that the pressure on the adult services budget is very great. We know that there are real challenges with homelessness. If people become homeless, the council has a statutory duty to provide them with accommodation. If we haven't got enough accommodation of our own available, and when demand rises, that's a real challenge. We haven't got enough accommodation of our own available, particularly temporary accommodation. We're forced to put people up in bed and breakfast accommodation. That's emergency accommodation. And emergency accommodation is expensive. It's incredibly disruptive for the people involved. It often takes them away from the communities in which they have connections. If they have children of school age, it potentially takes them away from the school and really disrupts the life of those children and their educational chances, their life chances. So, these are personal tragedies, but they're also financial tragedies for the council. So trying to address that is something that's been forced on us, in a sense, to do it urgently. So that's led to our decision to use some of the council's own estate, particularly its underutilised or empty commercial properties, as emergency or as temporary accommodation. And that conversion work was a really good piece of joint working between adults and children's and housing and estates, assets. And it's come up with a corporate solution to a problem that was acutely affecting one part of the council, but that would have a big impact on the council's overall budget. So, yes, we've talked about a lot of this in the past, and we've thought about ways of doing things, but I have to say the real pressure has been on in the last 2 years, and that's made us move things forward in ways that perhaps we wouldn't have done so quickly. And it's made us think more inventively. And that's perhaps a plus. It's come out of this difficult situation. We've had to think a lot more creatively about how we do things. But that, if I may, is a concrete example. You were saying, what's actually happening. That's a concrete example of a success story that's come about through that kind of joined up approach. And then your final point was about placements and care homes. And you kind of made the very valid point that lots of people would prefer not to go into a care home. Yes, I think that's absolutely true. There are a variety of reasons why that's the case. Obviously, leaving your own family home is an immensely emotional wrench, and it's a kind of sign that you're on the last leg. So a lot of people are very reluctant to make that move and don't want to make it. And helping them stay in their own home is a good thing, because that will actually be cheaper to provide them with care. And it will probably help them have a more fulfilled and happy life in their last stages of life. But there is a need for care homes. And one of the things that further discourages people going into a care home is the expense. It is extremely expensive if you go into a private care home. Eye-wateringly expensive per week. In this area, between the cheapest will be £1,500, and you can go up to £2,000 a week. Now, even with somebody with fairly reasonable savings, it's not going to take very long for those to become exhausted or come down to the level at which you can still retain your remaining savings, a pretty modest amount, and the council has to step in and cover the cost. So if we, first of all, are able to offer accommodation that is somewhat cheaper, we're delaying that process of exhaustion of private funds and then the council having to step in. We're also gaining an income ourselves. Rather than that income going to a private provider, it's coming to the council. So that's helping us cover the costs of adult social care. So it is, to me, a win-win. It's a great thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And it is kind of participating, disrupting, in a sense, the market. If we're offering something that is a bit cheaper, that may have an impact across the market in the way in which care homes consider their tariffs. So there are a variety of reasons why I think it's a good thing to do and why we are doing it.
There's a specific question about how much savings we will make as a result of buying that care home.
Well, I can't give you those figures here and now, but I'm sure we can get you those figures, those projections of what savings we think we will make. But I can assure you, obviously, these are the questions that normally would come through a different overview and scrutiny committee. So we haven't got Matt Pope here this evening, unless he's hiding somewhere that I haven't seen. But Matt would be able to give you that detail, and he will be able to tell you about the kind of projections of what we think the savings will be. So by all means, you can either contact him directly for that information, or if you prefer, I'll ask him and send it on to you, whichever's more convenient for you.
Can I add, if I can add to that? So I'm thinking about the questions that you've just asked there, and with that final point, in terms of the care home, something that we benefit from is that we have Optalis that provides services for adults as well. So they're actually part of this equation in terms of the care home, which help in terms of containing some of the costs. So that's the benefit that we have in the borough. You mentioned about people coming out of hospital, and they absolutely don't necessarily want to go in, of course, go into a care home. They'd rather stay at home. So we work, as in the council, work with the hospital on the hospital discharge that I mentioned. So we have that better care fund, and we use that reablement to help people stay in their homes. That's absolutely what the preference is, because, as I say, that's where people would prefer to be. So if I just wanted to make that point there, and on the point about Marmot, I know Stephen's talked about that, and something I wanted to add was with regards to what's different as well with Marmot is really understanding where the inequalities are. So we talked about the average masking inequalities. It's really understanding where the inequalities are in the borough, and ensuring whatever we do, there's a targeted approach which is effective. And I think that is what the difference is. And it's utilising our learning from Marmot that will help us do it. So I think, there is a real difference there. And in terms of the point that you made about joint working, what I'd say is that if we go back to COVID, in terms of the community and voluntary sector, then that actually we really sort of started a lot of joint work with the voluntary sector during COVID, and it was fantastic to work with the voluntary sector during that time, who were brilliant, and we've been able to build on that. And there's going to be the tackling poverty strategy later on in the agenda, which where the voluntary sector again are key in terms of actions that have an impact. So that, I think, for me is an example, and that partnership working within the council, as Stephen has mentioned, that in terms of purchasing a care home, absolutely, we worked across departments. In terms of purchasing a home for children, for young people, again, saving on placement costs, so there's a purpose to it. That's absolutely working across the council in doing so. So that approach to temporary accommodation, it was very much us all coming together. So we discussed it, our corporate leadership team really work, and we've got what we call a silver group of a number of assistant directors from across the council that come together, and we've got a number of those groups where they come together on different matters. And one of those is this temporary accommodation, for example. And I think that just one final one in terms of joint working is I mentioned about social care futures earlier on. Again, that's really working with our community, with adults and young people who have that lived experience, and actually having something which is substantial out of that. So there's a lot, I think, of joint working that's taking place. It does take it does take time. Because I'm going back to the voluntary sector and work the voluntary sector, you have to build trust. It's all about relationships.
Yeah.
You don't always get it right, but it, you know, when you get it right, you can have a fantastic impact.
Like all relationships, it does need to be nurtured, encouraged, and occasionally given a little bit of repair work.
Comment, and I promise this is the last one. Just coming back to on what you said regarding people going into staying in their own homes.
Yes.
I think the problem we already know, and this is what I hear from a number of our residents as well who are in the predicament, that the budget which is being allocated, I know there's a financial pressures as well, obviously, is not enough as a result, because the care workers who are actually providing the service, they are being paid such a low amount. As a result, the turnover is very high. And as a result, actually the clients, they do not receive the service, the quality service, which they expect, right? So I know it's a vicious circle, but nevertheless, it impacts the quality of the care. And they expect obviously better, because it develops takes a time before the care worker develops a relationship with the person which is being provided service to. But if because of high turnover, and I understand it's more than 20%, 25% high, attrition rate, which means that they never develop that relationship. It's one person coming and next week somebody else, and it actually is severely impacting the quality of the services. And this is what I'm hearing from a number of families who are actually facing this particular issue. So I don't know how we address that, but this is obviously a real issue on the doorstep.
Well, it is a very difficult issue to address, to be quite frank, because, as you quite rightly say, the pay for care workers is very low, disgracefully low, and I think we can all agree. But actually fixing that is quite a big challenge. Any attempt to increase that pay significantly will have an impact on council budgets. So it is a really big challenge. And as the government responds with providing us with more money, it's a constant battle. We are trying to do all we can to facilitate the development of a more permanent workforce so far as social care is concerned. But I can't pretend there aren't really big challenges there, and you've put your finger on the nature of them. But we are mindful of that, and we are doing our best in really difficult circumstances to try and address the problem.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, I'd like to thank both of you for the presentation. It was very interesting and informative. Thank you. Okay, now we go on to agenda item 9, which is Q4 performance monitoring report. And I want to bring to your attention the fact that this is for January, February and March of this year. And it was prepared for June. So it does mention that we're expecting a general election, but that doesn't mean that we're still expecting a general election. And it also, because it's year end, it also has the direction of travel and stuff for the whole year. What else was I going to say? Oh yes, it includes the performance indicators for adult social care and children's services, because it's one single report, but we don't discuss those measures here in this committee. And a couple more things. Yes, there are some stretch targets which might be amber or red, but that's because they're stretch targets, and the amber or red doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. It's just that, we're really stretching ourselves. And finally, have you got any comments on any of the performance indicators, but on the performance rather than the presentation of them? And if you've got any remarks on the presentation, they can go straight to Sally.
Just very quickly, Catherine, my name appears here as the person who's meant to take responsibility for this. You've heard more than enough from me already, so I'm not going to say terribly much other than to say there is a great panoply of really skilled directors here who will be able to answer any questions of a technical nature you want to bring up about these KPIs. I'm quite confident of that. Yes, they're from adults or children.
Okay, so any questions? Andrew?
Yeah, my one was more just to sort of to get a bit more information about its number CEX8, which is the proportion of working residents pupils eligible for free school meals. I was just
Page number is it?
Oh, sorry, 52. I think it's I was just more wondering where the targets have come from, and is the move towards the target, is that based on wanting to make sure all those who should be receiving school meals are signed up for it, and therefore is that target based on how many we think should be signed up for them?
As having said, I wouldn't say anything, as we haven't got anybody here from adults and children, and you've asked a question about adults and children. I think I have to try and answer it. I have to say I puzzled about that KPI because I thought, hold on a minute, isn't it a good thing to have fewer children actually taking up free school meals rather than more? But I think the answer, which is about to be provided to you by Sally, is that it's about you're right, Andrew. It's about those who are eligible. How many of them are actually getting the free school meals? Is that right, Sally, or have I got it wrong?
Yes, spot on, Stephen. So there isn't actually a number that's provided to us locally that says this number of children within Wokingham are eligible for free school meals. So we have to base our own kind of target on what we think is actually required across the borough. And from memory was circa 8%, and we've increased that because we want to make sure that as many children as possible who are eligible can actually sign up to free school meals for those families. And that's not just the council that we talk about partnership work, and that is absolutely us working with schools, etc., to support us kind of promoting free school meals. And again, there'll be more on that in the Tackling Poverty report, but about removing the stigma around free school meals. So that's part of our ambition.
So, sorry, can I just add that? So, we don't know necessarily from that what proportion of those are actually. So, for all we know, it could be 100%. I'm sure it's not necessary, but it could be close to that. Yeah.
That's correct. There's no national information that gives us the exact eligibility figure for Wokingham.
Yeah, Alison.
I think I have commented before that clearly Key Stage 1 pupils are all of them are having free school meals. And I think the most important thing is that those children are registered for pupil premium. Pupil premium includes the free school meals and extra money for the school to enable, and as we all know, schools need more funding. So this is why it always surprises me that it focuses on this aspect of free school meals, because that's the Key Stage 2 and above, where we should be looking at encouraging all of our families who are eligible because of their income to be registered for pupil premium, not just for free school meals.
So you have definitely raised that before, Alison, and when we went back and we said we'd come back and make sure that it was clarified, and I think in Q3 report from memory, we talked about how the Key Stage 1, where it is open for all, is excluded from this. This is in addition to that. So where it's actually open for every single child to access, this is over and above into that kind of Key Stage 2 and beyond.
Perhaps we should simply add that narrative that this is children from from year 3.
Absolutely. It was added in Q3, but we'll actually forward.
But on your point, Alison, I know Prue is doing a lot of good work on exactly that. So thank you for that point, about the pupil premium. She is working very hard to try and make sure that take-up is maximised, because that will help, as you've said, schools.
Pauline, you have a question?
I'm not sure if we're doing this in a particular subject matter order, but I wanted to ask about recycling. Is that?
No, we're not doing it in a particular order.
Okay, fine. Good. There's a comment in here about, which seems to be the same comment as we get rather a lot, which is you can't tell what these recycling figures mean because they're all messed up because of the grass recycling, which in itself is dependent on the growth of grass. Can't we just take the grass recycling out of this so we can see the actual
What
recycling
page is it,
data?
Pauline?
Page 36. Please. So at the moment, you can't actually tell what's going on because of the reliance on green recycling.
Isn't this the measure that was changed?
Yes, may I help? Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. So this is obviously looking back at the last year. The performance figures going forward will be what you see here, plus the total green recycled, as is here, the total recycled number. Then it'd be broken down into what is green, food, other.
So yes, you are doing it, just not visible yet.
Going forward.
Brilliant, thank you.
Caroline.
Thank you. On page 34, you're talking about housing and relying on the private sector to provide housing. Going forward, I do hear in the press quite often that private landlords are coming out. Do you see that as a problem, or is it not affecting us?
I think anything with housing is such a scarce resource is a continued challenge, to be honest. We have got really good relationships with our private sector landlords. We continue to work with them. There's a benefit for them in terms of certainty, in terms of de-risking their offer and their position, which helps. So yeah, I can't say it's not continues to be a challenge. Like all housing, it's incredibly scarce. We obviously continue to rely on other streams coming forward for affordable housing as well, be it from the not from the private sector, but from the affordable when we have new developments, etc. But yeah, it certainly remains a challenge. But the figures show here, despite an increased number of presentations, the number that we're able to house in all forms of accommodation is still successful against a very challenging market.
Jade.
Just one comment and one question. I mean, the term affordable housing, right? I find that quite strange here, right? Because affordable housing is not affordable in this part of the borough, right? So I think it's a in a sense, I know it's about, what is it, about 80% of the value or something?
Well, I think affordable housing is, it's a technical term. Obviously, there's a layperson's understanding of affordable housing, which doesn't correspond with the technical description of affordable housing. And affordable housing covers a wide variety of different tenures. It includes simply discounted market housing. So the previous government had a first home scheme, which effectively offered purchasers, first time purchasers, a 20% discount on the price. So they'd be paying 80% of the market rate. So that is, for technical purposes, included in the definition of affordable housing. We also have shared ownership schemes, affordable rent, which is sub-market rent, and then the most valuable tenure, social rent. And our current policy is to try and get 70% social rental and 30% distributed between the other forms of affordable, because the most valuable is social rental in terms of meeting housing need. But a good deal of our affordable housing has been provided through market housing schemes as a developer contribution through market housing schemes. We haven't really had the capacity to build our own. Now, it may be that the legislative landscape's changing and we might have that greater capacity. We have some advantages as a council in terms of the range of different options open to us. We thankfully still have an HRA, a housing revenue account. In other words, we still have our own council house stock. It is a bit small. It's only 2,700 houses. We could do with it being a bit bigger because that helps its long-term viability in terms of finance. But we also have council-owned, wholly owned housing companies. And we work, of course, with registered providers, and we have a list of our preferred partners amongst the registered providers with whom we have a good working relationship, and effectively we've interviewed them to make sure they are meeting the standards we require. So we have a number of vehicles, but ultimately, at present at least, we are dependent on the housing market providing us with all sorts of tenures in the affordable category. And that has been a challenge over the last couple of years because the housing market's been pretty flat. So the delivery has been slower over the last year or so than it has been in previous years. But in the pipeline, we've got quite a lot coming. And if we are able to expand the HRA, that will benefit the HRA in financial terms because every new property going in adds additional rental. And if it is a genuinely new property, you probably find the repairs and maintenance liability is limited for quite some years. Your problem is if you have an old housing stock and you're losing the best housing through right to buy, and that is a challenge. And it'll be very interesting to see what the new government does on things like right to buy, whether it has a moratorium on it, or whether it ends it, or whether it leaves it as it is. That would certainly make a difference, I think, in terms of the viability of the HRA. Because if you're losing your best and most recent stock and you're only left with the old stock, your rental income's remaining broadly the same, but your liabilities are going up and up and up.
Oh, sorry, if I can, I mean, I understand the details you explained. The point I was making is that when the average house in the borough is, I don't know, it's 500,000 plus, right? Even 20% of that. The technical, we can debate the technical terms, but at the end of the day, me as a resident, for me, is it affordable or not, right? And it is not affordable. So that is confusing whole what we use as a term, technical term, but the person on the street, they think, you know, this doesn't make any sense. So I think
I understand your point, and underneath it lies an even more important point, which is that we've experienced in the last 15, 20 years very considerable house building in the borough. Now, the normal assumption is build more houses, the price comes down. That hasn't happened. The reverse has happened. Price has gone up. The supply has increased, but the price has gone up. And that's because there is an almost insatiable demand because of our proximity to London. You know, this has gone on for generations. I mean, I would say most families in the borough probably can trace their origins to London. So there's been a migration from London to an area like this going on for a very long time. But that's certainly been accelerated really noticeably by COVID, and then the development of new working practices, working from home, hybrid working. All of that has enabled people to move to this area and still retain jobs in London, commute in maybe 2 or 3 days a week and work from home otherwise. And that inevitably, you know, brings in new people with new ideas. They're very welcome to come to our borough. They add a lot to it, but it inescapably keeps house prices high. So the answer, I'm afraid, is actually on the technical question about affordable housing. We have to try and increase the amount of genuinely affordable housing available. And we can only do that, I think, by trying to increase our ask of developers in terms of, in the short term, we can only do that by increasing our ask of developers in terms of the proportion of affordable housing they provide through market schemes.
That was just a comment. It wasn't a question in detail, right? But we spent a little more time on that one. The question actually was a generic one regarding the targets we set, and I'm probably asked this question before as well. We set these targets. What is the criteria? What criteria do we use? This is across all sectors, right? So look, this is going to be 10%, 12%, 15%, whatever it is. So what are the bases on which these targets are set? So at least understand, right, that we are measuring against that, but this is the thinking, the rationale behind.
I won't speak for all my director colleagues, they will have their own view. But when we started, if you remember, I think it was back in about 2020, when we redesigned the approach to the key performance indicators. What we did through the Insight and Strategy team was look really through a kind of breadth and depth of what other local authorities are doing. We really we spoke to the LGA, we looked at best practice, and then we understand kind of what's going on in our individual areas. So if you look at some of the ones in my directorate, we're looking at information about standards around turnover, and we will take that information from the industry standards that we should include. We'll look at information about the website in Jackie's portfolio, and we'll be looking at that through the lens of what is best practice from public sector websites. So what I can't say, Shahid, is it's coming from one source. A good set of key performance indicators actually come from a whole range of different areas based on the specific KPIs that are coming forward. But unless Director wants to say anything different.
Okay, Pauline had another question.
I'm not even sure I'm allowed to ask this, so you can tell me I'm not. Just, you made me think of something with your question, actually. The question is about, is there an increase in demand for school places as a result of the policies in the general election? Have we seen anything yet? Because I've noticed in children's services, I can't see any measure of waiting lists at all. That's not something that seems to be in here. And I don't even know whose problem it is if we have a very large one, to be honest. So I don't know if
it's children's services, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be fair, there's only been a new government for less than 2 weeks.
No, I know, but
I think we're going to be seeing any impact on anything.
Well, I don't agree with you, actually, Stephen. I've heard, and I'm not sure it's true, which is why I'm asking the question, that a lot more people are starting to express an interest in state schools from the private sector. Now, I'm not sure it's true, which is why I'm asking the question. But I can't see any measure of that in here anywhere. So do you measure it? Is it? I'm not asking if it's true now, because I presume that should be asked in Children's Services Scrutiny. But if you don't measure it, should you be measuring it? And if you should be measuring it, can we get it added, please?
I think the obvious point to make is that obviously any changes in government policy potentially have an impact, and our officers assess what they assume could be impacts of any change of policies in any way whatsoever, and see how those may impact on the council. That's ongoing work. It happens under all governments, and it happens continuously, and we will wait and see whether there is an impact of the way you're suggesting. At the moment, we don't know. There's no change at this stage.
I don't know either. To be clear, I'm not trying to ask a political question. I'm trying to ask a question about what I think might be a hole in the KPIs, because I'm not even sure whose problem it is if there is a sudden increase.
Well, these KPIs are looking back. So there's no hole in them, because they're looking back at the situation that existed.
We've always had waiting lists. Yeah. We've always had people who want to get into schools that can't get in. So we may have a bigger problem. We
also need to recognise that the demographics is changing. It may be in the future we will have a different problem. We'll have some schools without sufficient pupils, It's not the
Precisely
full
why I'm asking the question.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
not suggesting there's an answer. I'm asking the question.
no, well, it's a legitimate question to ask, but we can't answer it through these KPIs because they're looking backwards. They're not looking forwards.
Pauline's asking if we should add a KPI, I think, aren't you? Yes.
Well, that's a reasonable request, but it's a request that you've put to the wrong place. This has to be done through Children's Services. We're not here talking about those KPIs in particular. But
I think it's a question for Sally.
Sally will have noted what you've said.
Thanks, Pauline. So the KPIs are set obviously between the director and the lead member, and we do that really in Q4 for the year, so that we've got that kind of consistency and baseline throughout. I think it's just echoing really what Stephen said, just because it isn't in this key performance indicator data, because obviously if we all have our own performance dashboards, and if we brought everything, then it would be kind of a whole night every month. It doesn't mean that we aren't capturing it, but we can feed that back through to the DCS, obviously, but also through to the overview and scrutiny for children and adults. But it would be captured.
Alison.
I've been on overview scrutiny management for many years, and we are the management committee. So if there's an issue raised about any part of the KPIs, that is something we will discuss, and we could suggest, we can recommend to Children's Services that Children's Overview Scrutiny that they put that on their work programme. What I wanted to ask about, put my hand up, is obviously we're looking at the Q4 figures at the end of the year, and I wanted to ask, have many of the targets been revised so that when we see Q1 coming through, there'll be different targets than we're looking at now? I know I've raised before that RA2, for example, the target is much lower than we ever achieved, which is on page 24, everyone. However, I noticed that the graph has a much higher target than the actual one in the table. But so the general question was, have our directors looked at increasing many of the targets? I know, for example, Matt Pope's always liked to have a very ambitious target to hit. Will we be seeing quite different targets when we meet in September to look at the Q1 KPIs?
Sally is itching to answer that.
Thank you. So I can say in my own portfolio that we've kept our targets, our KPIs same. I know, as George has already mentioned, there's been some changes within place and growth, and George can go through that. So in the round, there's not been significant changes across the piece. There might be some tweaks here and there, but we can send, if members would feel comfortable, we'll send a written response of what the KPIs now and what they've changed prior to the meeting in September. So you've got that kind of compare and contrast. We can send you the detail through to members today.
Lou, you have a question?
Chair, can I just come in against, just to reassure members, I think, as an example of where it is changing is on the waste issue. So you'll know that as the year progresses, we introduce a different collection service as of August this year. And so the measurements in terms of recycling rates are changing and going up. The target is increasing basically as the quarters go on. It'll be a stepped change as the year progresses to its end. So just to say, absolutely, that performance target has changed because of the policies that we've introduced and we're implementing.
Lou.
It was RA2 that I referenced, George, that I've mentioned before. RA2, which is the leisure activities, which we smash every time because it's rather a low target.
I don't know if this is more of a comment than a question, but on page 38, I was looking at the data for the all recorded crime in Wokingham, and I was thinking about the relatively recently approved strategy for violence against women and girls, and it would have been nice to have something in the narrative there that maybe talked a little bit about those figures. So thinking about domestic abuse, sexual assault, rape, there was nothing there to talk about that.
Certainly we can give you a bit more data around that. I think it's a really good question to raise, actually. As you say, a relatively new initiative, lots of work happening, lots of change happening as well against that. So we can kind of take that away and give you a bit more data around that. I think it's the point that Sally made. We try and keep these figures at a high level. That doesn't stop you drilling down and asking more information about what's underneath those figures. So I could take that away and give you some more on that. Thank you.
Jai, did you have a last question?
Yeah, I think just going back to the point which was made earlier on, I think, looking at the KPIs by nature, we know we're looking backwards. It's a rear mirror, if I can say, of the driver, right? It's not looking forward. But as this is overview and scrutiny management committee, I think it will not be, my suggestion will be that while we look at the past, and also it could be useful for all members to say, have one KPI, not KPI as such, but at least the likely trend, what the officers, how the officers see the situation based on what you know. So what's up and coming? So the councillors and the members know beforehand, for example, such a situation, well, it could be a political situation, it could be economic situation, right? We think this might have a negative or positive impact. We can't give you certain, but just heads up. So I think that would be useful in a sense, because otherwise, the thing is, I'll give you the analogy of the car, right? I'm a driver. I look at the mirror screen, which is a much smaller screen, and the wider screen is actually the windscreen itself. I want to know what's up and coming. And yes, it will give me an insight as a member what has happened in the past. But this happened 6 months ago, some cases 9 months ago. But it doesn't. But what's maybe the action we've taken, maybe result, as a result of that, what is likely to happen in the next quarter? Or there could be X and Y things, and whatever they might be, it could be positive or negative, just heads up. I think that, I'm not sure whether other members may find it useful or not, but I think I would certainly find that useful. It's just a suggestion.
Sally.
Thanks, Shahid. We'll take that away and have a conversation about what that could look like. And interesting, one of the things we've tried to do previously is where we've got a target that is amber or kind of bordering on red, we put down what the rectification is, which was something we added in last financial year, based on membership of this group's recommendation. And I think the other thing that we've benefited from, certainly through my experience of being to the management committee, one of the previous members used to ask directors, based on all of your KPIs, what's the thing that keeps you up at night? What is going on within your portfolio that worries you the most based on these KPIs? And I always found that was a really useful and interesting question to be asked, because it allows directors really just to hone in on exactly what you've described, not just what's happened previously, but actually what do we see on our radar. And that was a real regular question that we would be asked through this committee, which was useful.
Going back, is that something we can actually move forward with, or a suggestion, or because it is not here at the moment?
I think that's entirely at your liberty to request that of us, and I'm sure we do our best to provide it if that's what you wish. I think the kind of work you're asking for a sight of does go on fairly regularly. Officers are obviously scanning the horizon and seeing what's coming and working out how that might impact on the council and its delivery of services. But I think one has to introduce an element of realism here, that there's a limit to what you can predict. There's a limit to what you can see over and beyond the horizon. Harold Macmillan, I think it was when asked what was the most difficult thing in politics? Events, dear boy, events. Things you can't predict and don't know are going to happen that really disrupt things.
I think, I'm not, suggesting that, we are asking for a perfect sort of what's going to happen. It's likely trend based on what we know. I'm sure there's so much in-depth analysis goes on behind the scenes. Officers do that all the time. But as members, do we know? That's the question.
The advice is,
whatever you
by
feel
all means,
is
smoke,
appropriate.
but don't inhale. If you think that this If you're willing to regard it as you might regard the weather forecast, as a guide but not a certainty, you'll be fine.
Thanks very much, Chair. I just wanted to answer the question about violence against women and girls, if I can come back to that. So I think it's a really good question. I just wanted to flag the fact that in terms of the community safety partnership that we've got for Wokingham Borough, we do take reports in more detail about violence against women and girls. That includes, for example, and rape. And so that there are questions that go into more detail about the numbers of reports and the actions that we're taking. And for example, we have reports on domestic homicide abuse and the actions that have been taken with regards to those. So that type of thing goes to our CSP. It doesn't stop stuff coming here either, but I think I just wanted to reassure you on that. And domestic abuse obviously goes to the CSP as well. Mark.
Thank you. I think Sally was nodding, and the comment, I would also expect some of those comments to be coming up during the individual scrutiny groups themselves rather than the management committee, or as well as the management committee, where there's the opportunity of going, what is keeping you up at night? Are there issues, emerging issues coming down the line that scrutiny needs to be involved in through its overview function as well? Because although KPIs are rearward looking, you would expect that if everything is running smoothly and there are a couple of ambers and reds and there are things that are going to crop up, that you would expect at the scrutiny meetings themselves, that as part of the officer's report or the director's report at those sessions, that would then be, these are the things that are coming down.
Very quick response to that, if I may, Mark. I think you raised a really important point about overview and scrutiny's overview function. I've said it before, but it's worth saying again, I'm really keen to encourage the involvement of overview and scrutiny at early stages of policy development. So we're already doing some work about thinking about things that we know we want to try and do, but we don't exactly know how we're going to do them yet. And I think it would be really helpful if we could engage with overview and scrutiny at that formative stage before things are really firmed up, so that you have the chance to have a genuine input in shaping the way policy develops, rather than responding to policy that has been developed, which can be a much more adversarial process. It's, we've done it, so we defend it. You're having it imposed on you late in the day, so you don't like it. And then we're not necessarily getting a good and constructive conversation. Whereas if we can bring overview and scrutiny, and that includes all members of all parties in at an early stage, and then we can take on board comments that we may not have thought of and perspectives that we may not be aware of. That would be really helpful.
Sure. Dave.
Obviously, I'm new to this committee, so this question might be slightly naive, but I'm happy to say it. The targets that we're talking about in those things, am I right in understanding that the individual directors set those targets for their own group, and then we look at the KPIs against those targets?
So directors will work with their executive member to set those KPIs. They'll also be supported through the insight strategy function that will be looking at best practice to say, actually, these are some areas that you could consider, but fundamentally the responsibility sits with the director alongside the exec member.
So do we look at the performance of other councils as a key area of setting that KPI and making sure that we're sort of, if our aim is to be one of the 10% best operating councils, that KPI forms within that target, etc.?
Yeah, and it goes back to the answer that I gave a little bit earlier. We'll look at a number of different sources of data. So we would look at other local authorities. We would look at from a benchmarking perspective. We would look at LGA. We'd look at, if it's a technical KPI, for example, I would look at specific technical information or standards that I might want to have in my own portfolio. Louise, from a HR perspective, might look at workforce standards that are across the public sector. So they're coming from a number of different sources, one of which would be the local authorities as part of that benchmarking. It's a good question.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, in terms of adults, I think the point that was made earlier was that some of the targets that we have are particularly stretching, and it is in adults that they are particularly stretching, and that's particularly stretching against other local authorities, top local authorities. So, as we said before, just because something's an amber doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing if it's a particularly stretching target, which it is the case in adult services.
I'm very happy to have stretching targets. I think it's the best thing. We don't want to aspire to mediocrity, do we?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, let's wrap that up then. I'd like to resolve that we thank Stephen Conway and supporting officers for attending the meeting to present the report and answer all these questions. That we note progress against the KPIs relevant to this committee.
Chair, that's the recommendation I put forward.
Yeah, I'm just coming on. Yeah, so I'm coming on to the specific recommendations, and that further information be circulated to members in response to some of the specific points raised during the discussion. And then I've got 3 things written down. One, that we change the narrative to say that Key Stage 1 is omitted from CEX8. There's an 8. And consider adding waiting lists for schools to the children's services KPIs. Did we decide that we were going to do that? And add some narrative to PG9 about violence against women and girls. And Shahid, have you got another suggestion?
This is what I was suggesting earlier on, that perhaps overlooking weather forecast analogy which Stephen gave is what's up and coming. Anything which makes you keeps you awake at night. I think that would be useful insight for members. As I said before, there's a lot of analysis goes on by executives, and I'm sure but it'd be useful for members to know as well something. And I don't think members will hold you to that, but at least they know, okay, this particular one, issues which are concerning us, and we just want to flag it up, but we'll let you know if this obviously becomes red or something. So I thought that'd be useful for members in these KPIs.
Okay, Pauline's got something as well.
Yeah, just going on the waiting list thing, just to be clear, it needs to be unique people. We don't want to end up with a position where you have the housing waiting list where you've got thousands of people on it, but it's the same people on multiple lists. They need to be unique individuals as opposed to lots of people applying to lots of schools. But I'll leave you to sort out how you do that.
Can we also be provided with information, a bit more information on the basis of how the targets are set, so that part of the overview and scrutiny can be scrutinising on the targets themselves? Because I don't think if we don't scrutinise that, it's very difficult to tell how we're genuinely performing.
Okay, have we finished that? Right, agenda item 10. Is everyone happy with it?
Yes.
Right, okay. Agenda item 10, tackling poverty action plan update. Sorry.
Happy with what?
With the resolutions.
Okay. Does that include the recommendation which I put forward as well?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure because I didn't get the.
I think Neil's got it down.
What will be the wordings of that recommendation then?
Neil.
Well, I'll capture what's been discussed and I'll turn it into a recommendation. Happy to circulate it to members after the meeting.
Okay. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, that's
right. Okay, agenda item 10, tackling poverty action plan update. Sally.
Thank you. I think I'll open up to Rachel first as the exec member. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Sally. So right at the beginning of this meeting, Stephen Conway said that we are on average an affluent borough, but that average affluence marks huge inequalities within the borough. So a lot of people in Wokingham are comfortably off. We have pockets of, sometimes very great wealth, but also we've got a lot of people. We have thousands of people who can't afford the essentials: food, heat and shelter. We have a lot of people in Wokingham Borough, unfortunately, who are living in poverty. There was some discussion earlier about free school meals. So our estimate is at the moment that 10% of children in the borough are living in households where the income is so very, very low that their families are eligible for means-tested free school meals. So the last few years, with the high inflation that we've had, have been incredibly tough for a lot of residents. Now, we as a borough, we can't unfortunately we can't bridge the gap between the incomes that people are on and what they would need to afford the basics. That gap is just too wide. But we absolutely have a duty to do what we can to help those living on the lowest incomes in Wokingham. So 2 years ago, we launched the borough's first tackling poverty strategy. We're finishing up the second year of that strategy and we're moving into the third year. And we've got a handover of teams here tonight. So previously it was Louise Livingston, who was the officer who was looking after tackling poverty. Jackie Whitney is taking over. We have a point of continuity in Sally Watkins here tonight. Our other team members who aren't here tonight but are absolutely vital are our partners in the Hardship Alliance. So the voluntary and community sector partners that we're working with to deliver the tackling poverty strategy. This meeting, of course, is looking at the last year and very much with a view to informing the year to come. The scope of what we're looking at here is work directly connected to the tackling poverty strategy, and I thought it might be useful to say a few words about that. So it would include, for example, spending of the £250,000 which this administration put aside to boost the delivery of the tackling poverty strategy and to bring the benefits forward. What would be outside of the scope would be distribution of grants from central government. So the Household Support Fund would be outside of the scope of this. The tackling poverty strategy year runs from July to July, and much of the funding will straddle 2 years. So we will have projects running over 2 or more years. We expect the year 3 plan to be ready for the 1st of August, which is slightly later than we would normally aim for. And that's because of a large piece of work which has been done to come up with a more preventative response to tackling poverty. So some of the central themes that you'll see here tonight are, first of all, a joined up approach, working with our partners in the community. That's both broadly with the Hardship Alliance Action Group and with a smaller group, which is the Hardship Alliance, who are very deeply connected with the council as a partner in tackling poverty in the borough. And also, very importantly, cross-council working, looking at how we as a council can work across the directorates to help those residents who are in the most need. It's also about prioritising where we can add most value. So I said at the beginning that the council cannot on its own bridge the gap between what people need in the borough and the money that the incomes that they have. That gap is just too wide. So we have to be very careful that we're prioritising where we can add value. And we're working very much to increase the reliance on data and evidence. We are seed funding. So we are making relatively small investments, which we hope over time will deliver very much broader benefits, very much larger benefits for our residents. We're measuring where we can make the most impact. We're measuring the impact of what we can do. And we also have robust management. When we commission services from our partners, for example, we invite expressions of interest, we contract with the chosen partner, we manage and we measure progress and results. And just to finish off, a couple of examples of some really positive changes that we have seen already. I'm just picking two because there are many, many more. So these are from relatively small amounts of seed funding. So our Partner First days, last month alone, they held a number of uniform sales, and they saved over £11,000 to households in the borough through community sales for school uniform items. So that's an absolutely huge saving, which has come out of a relatively small amount of seed funding. And by the end of the second year of funding, we expect that the specialist debt advisor that we're funding to have saved residents over £340,000 through debt write-offs. And most of the people who benefited from those debt write-offs are people who are living with disabilities or with a long-term health condition. So, did you want to pick up from there, Sally?
Rachel, there's not much to add other than what Rachel said, and to say we're welcome to take any questions. As I've said, we've got the outgoing assistant director lead and the incoming assistant director lead, so I feel very well supported this evening for any specific questions.
Caroline, you've got questions?
Wasn't actually strictly a question. I was just looking through all the examples of things that you've done, and I think it's absolutely fantastic the amount of things you've done that have prevented rather than dealt with the symptoms. I think it's really, really good. So thank you very much.
Caroline.
I was going to say thank you too, but also because I'm probably getting a bit older, how many of these are pensioners, and do they have particular problems as opposed to younger families? But there's no self-interest, otherwise I would declared right at the beginning.
So I'll start, and then Jackie will be able to give the specific details. So when we developed the tackling poverty strategy now, as Rachel mentioned, over 2 years ago, one of our Hardship Alliance members is Age UK, which is really important to us, so that we've got that representation of the older population within the borough. And again, one of the key areas of focus is absolutely the people who tend to be asset rich and cash poor, and we need to have a different level of offer and support. And for us, from a local authority perspective, we rely so heavily on making sure we take that intel from people like Fiona and Age UK, so that we have that targeted. But I'm sure Jackie will want to.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. So yeah, working really, really hard with our VCS with Age UK. So they've got a plethora of contacts, of networks and things, which is why it's always better to work collaboratively with organisations like the voluntary sector, because they've got such a wide network, and therefore the reach can be much wider than we could ever achieve on our own as a council. So working with them and their data, and obviously their database as well. So we do regular reporting with the voluntary sector, and have monthly meetings with Hardship Alliance where we report back on progress.
Thank you. Future's looking bright.
Yeah, indeed.
I'm sorry, we can give some specific information about older, if it would be helpful. We'll get you an email.
Yeah, we can do that.
Stephen wants to say something on this.
I couldn't resist, I'm afraid, after a really excellent presentation by Rachel and the comments made by Sally and Jackie, and also Pauline's very gracious comment about the good work that's been done. And you highlighted, Pauline, this is all good preventative work, and that comes back to a theme I was trying to outline earlier this evening, quite a bit earlier this evening, about the importance of prevention, early intervention, and investing to save, and also the importance of partnership working. And Jeed was looking for concrete examples. Well, here's another one: really good partnership working through the Hardship Alliance. In the Hardship Alliance, we're part of it. It's not that we have a partnership with the Hardship Alliance, we are part of it, and it's working very well. So I think those are good concrete examples of the kind of thing you were looking for.
Shaheen doesn't.
My turn. Rachel, I've been part of the group as well, where we discussed the details for the last couple of years, right? So I just want to applaud the great work which has been done. I mean, in terms of helping people who are more vulnerable, prevention, etc., and those uniforms and particular examples you mentioned. But this point, which I'm going to make, and which I made actually in the group as well, but I think it's important I make it while our senior leadership here as well, and I want this to be taken in a very constructive way, right? Looking at the numbers we're talking about and the type of help we are giving, to me, I see this as it's not actually making a dent into the poverty in the long term. And what we need to look at is, maybe with our partners, because we can't do it ourselves, is to help them to stand on their own feet. We can help them to maybe, okay, here's some help, but they need some help 6 months down the line. They need some help 1 year down the line. But are we really helping them in the long run? You know, that we know heard of the phrase saying, if you give somebody a fish, you feed them for the day. If you teach them how to fish, you feed them for life, right? That concept, I can't see that in our strategy. You know, how we're gonna. So that's the bit I'm missing. And one example which I give, and I think is worth reiterating, saying that this is something which actually one of the charities which adopted was, and I'm sure whether it's practical with a council. So one of the key ways, for example, say, I don't know what the exact numbers, say there are 1,000 families, suppose there are 1,000 families across, right? I'm sure the number might be different, right? But what that particular charity, the focus was that I says, we're going to help one member of their family to upskill, right? Whatever upskilling, it could be, I don't know, plumbing jobs, or it could be Corgi register, whatever it might be, right? And they actually funded them initially. And then when they started, their model was that when they started working, they pay them back, right? So basically, so what happened was regular contribution which they are making, that was stopped soon as they start working because of the demand for those services. So the point I'm making is, could we do something similar? Do we have the capacity to do it? Can you work with our partners? Because that is the long-term poverty alleviation we should be thinking about. This is great help which we're providing on a temporary basis, but that doesn't really help them in the long run. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. And that is the bit I see missing in our strategy. I hope this is taken as in a constructive way. But I'm
Thanks, Shahid. Yeah, music to our ears, I think, actually. So that's what we're working on now, prevention. So it's kind of multifaceted at the moment. So there's some things like for the Year 3 action plan, we've been talking to the Hardship Alliance, and we're absolutely unanimous that we want to focus on prevention. So a bit like the analogy of give a man a fish or teaching how to fish. And we're focusing on things like giving people a step up, and then we move away and it's sustainable, but we make sure it's sustainable and we support that in terms of prevention. So we're trying to not only manage the people who need the help right now, because they really need that help, but also those people, we're trying to use data and insight to identify where there potentially could be a problem. A bit like what you suggested earlier on about us getting the trends. So looking at the trends, looking at the data, looking at the insight, and then as a Hardship Alliance collaboratively working on solutions that can help stop people going into poverty or going into hardship as much as possible. We've got a wider programme of work, which I'm sure Sally can wax lyrical about too, but certainly from a Hardship Alliance point of view, our focus absolutely is on prevention, food security. So again, you'll see quite a lot in here about food, and food banks, but actually no one wants that to continue forever for obvious reasons. So it's about food security, teaching people to cook, teaching people about nutrition, and all of that good stuff. So yeah, absolutely on that.
Sorry, can I come back on that one? I think what you highlight is important, but what I was talking about maybe at a higher level and much more long term. What I'm specifically talking about is skills. Skills, not teaching how to sort of make a meal. I'm talking about skills which are in demand in the marketplace, which they can acquire and find jobs, start earning money, and do not depend on any of the stuff. This is what I'm talking about.
And I think that's the programme Jackie was going to say that I could wax lyrical about. So again, without wanting to use Jackie's words, it's absolutely music to our ears, because there is a programme of work which George and I are the joint sponsors of internally, because it crosses both of our directorates, really focusing on debt, housing and skills, to really understand, and you're absolutely right, being able to support people to develop their skills and be able to really have the opportunity to thrive. Going back to the Marmot Borough principles, you can see how it kind of all coalesces and co-aligns, is really high on our radar. And it's about how we work together to really, again, through that cross-council working, to be able to identify what the need is. So that data is so important, and understanding what we don't know, because we only have the data that we have, and how actually do we expand that to more of a community level, and then using that data and that need to inform our action. So we're on the start of that journey, as Rachel's aware, but our aspiration is really about working together to make sure that we've got that understanding about, it's not just a sticking plaster on a gaping wound. It really is that kind of, you know, full surgery, so that we offer that support to our residents that they need as soon as possible, so they've got the best life chances and the best opportunity to thrive in our borough.
Stephen.
Just as a footnote, as Sally's waxed lyrical, I'll just wax a little bit lyrical. 2 points really. First of all, the point about skills, employment and skills that you've raised, which is a very important point. We are trying to address this through other partnerships as well. So I mentioned earlier on, or Susan mentioned, or both of us mentioned, the strategic partnership with the University of Reading. One of the work streams on that is employment and skills. Also the Berkshire Prosperity Board, which has been founded this year by the agreement of the 6 Berkshire unitaries. He says immodestly led by Wokingham. I've got a work stream in there which is all about employment and skills and preparing young people for the new challenges and new opportunities of the economy as it develops. So there's work going on in all sorts of different ways to try and address the very important point you raised. But it is important also just to say something that can all too easily be missed here. A lot of the people who are in hardship at the moment are actually in work. They have jobs. They're just so lowly paid that they're not able to manage. And we do need to recognise that. There are people who are in work and yet are below the poverty line, are really struggling. And that is something that is relatively new. I mean, to an extent, it's existed forever, but it has become very acute as a result of the high period of inflation we've experienced. So it is worth remembering that it's not just about getting people into work and earning money and feeling they're making a contribution. Some people are already in work and working hard and trying to make a contribution, but still not able to make ends meet. And those people shouldn't be forgotten.
Sorry, just come back on that one. I mean, the point which I made actually regarding skills is across the board. It wasn't just particularly those people who are not in work, upskill them so they can get the jobs. I fully recognize, Stephen, what you're saying. There's a lot of people who are actually in jobs. They're low-paid jobs. We talked about care workers, for example, right? And they're struggling. That is also, they can upgrade their skills. But sometimes what happens is they don't have the means to do it. You know, they don't have the resources to do it. They need some guidance, for example. And this is where we can. So it's not people. I fully recognize what you said, but also this is also applies directly to what I said earlier on to help them to upskill so they can go for better jobs. I think one thing we find is the job market is actually there are lots of jobs available. It's not the lack of jobs. The problem is a lack of skills. This country generally across we find, right? And that's why people are coming across the world to work in Berkshire, in Wokingham, actually, and to occupy the jobs which are vacant, which could be filled by our local, our population, residents, but because they don't have the skills, therefore somebody else take up the jobs. this is a challenge for us, right? And the question, which is a common sense question, which is obviously a local government and also a national government as well. Why don't we upskill and invest in our own people? Which
I think these are all good questions, and we're in grave danger of being in total agreement, and yet still seeming not to be. So we probably should move on. But there's one final point which really relates to upskilling, and yes, of course, that's vitally important. I think we're all agreed with that, and I think there is a lot of work going on to try and deliver the outcomes you're looking for. But we do need to accept that we are in a financially constrained environment. We can't do it all on our own.
Rachel, did you want to add something?
Yes, I very quickly wanted to make a couple of points, and Stephen Conway has stolen half of my thunder, which is that a lot of people who are living in hardship in the borough are in work, and very often in full-time work, and very often in very essential key roles. So, people who are working in retail, people who are working in caring jobs, for example, absolutely essential jobs for our economy, are living in poverty. Also, a lot of people who are living in poverty are unpaid carers, again, people who are making an enormous contribution to the community, but who actually are not going to be in a position, unfortunately, to take up work or full-time work at the present time. And the final point that I wanted to make is when we're looking at upskilling people, one of the things that we're doing as part of Tackling Poverty strategy is starting right at the beginning, looking at children in education, and the £250,000 fund that this administration put towards boosting the Tackling Poverty strategy, that is funding 2 projects, which is looking at ensuring that every single child in the borough will be able to enjoy a fully rounded education, that they go to school with all of the tools and the equipment that they need to be able to do all of the subjects, which will enable them to make the most of their education and to gain the most skills that they possibly can right at the beginning of their education.
Yes, you had a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Slightly off the subject, I just wanted to know if members understood what a credit union was. That'll be a no. Have you heard of the Bank of Dave? Yes. Well, it's a Bank of Dave with a posh accent. And my job within the credit union is to work with the residents of Berkshire, many of our residents who have got themselves into financial difficulty and need help and support. But it would be very useful for us as a credit union if we had more members. What we do is I save. Caroline lends my money to Stephen. And want it back. And we want it back. The credit union has no money of its own. It doesn't make a profit. It's a mutual, so it pays any profit out to its members. And I'm a member. And it would be very useful if you were all members too. If you could join and save £500 a month. Okay, £5 a month. Then it would enable us to help out more of our residents in Berkshire who were in need. We could afford to lend them money at manageable interest rates. We could afford to speak to them on a very, very personal level about what they could afford to pay back. There is interest, of course there's interest, and there is a dividend paid to saving members. Not a lot. It's not going to change your life. It changed Dave's life, but it's not going to change ours. But it'd be very useful. And if anybody does want to join, just Google Boom Credit Union, headquarters by the seaside in Worthing, and I've never been. But there you go.
Thank you, Beth. That was very interesting. Got a question from Marie-Louise.
Yes, some time ago, so we might have passed, but I think it's worth restating the importance of having, both in terms of the Marmot principles and the poverty strategy, they kind of float above the historical context a bit. And the problem is that then that absence can get filled with, all these different explanations of, what's going on and so on. So the Marmot principles were based on this idea of proportionate universalism, this idea that there was an inequality that was rising and that has risen exponentially since the principles were first put forward, which I think was in 2010. So, I mean, the man himself has actually said that austerity has fundamentally, affected the context in which this is being done. And your little heroic man pushing his resources, in the picture kind of, strikes at my heart, because what is actually happening is that those resources are being taken away. So I think one of the things with both of these approaches is that they seem, or they come across as, quite depoliticized, with a small p, and not talking about partisanship. I'm talking about like addressing or having a shared understanding of the context in which we're working, and also the context of the people themselves, of the communities and the individuals that we're wanting to work with. And this is something that I think both the KPIs and this could benefit from, which is engagement with some of the indicators actually being generated from people themselves, the people themselves that we want to work with, because that can also help that politicization, that understanding actually drive in, because poor people in general are very, are highly skilled at being poor, because being poor is hard. Yeah, it involves an enormous amount of work, and people get very good at it. And that is something that, should be driving our responses a bit more than, I think they are in practice, but in the way that it's presented, they kind of float above this reality a bit.
Thank you. Andrew, did you have a question?
I just really very quickly wanted to come back on what Marie-Louise was saying, which I thought was very powerful and very, very important. And I think it's something we could do more of. I just wanted to mention one example of where we are doing that kind of thing, which is engaging directly with the people we're trying to help. And that's Social Care Futures, which is all about hearing the voice of the users of the services. And maybe we just need to roll that principle out a bit more. So I think you've made a really good and helpful point. Thank you.
Yeah, I sort of want to come back to some of the points of the strategy, and I think some things mentioned about local charities and things, which I think it's great that we've got lots of local charities and things, but I'm sort of wondering how reliant are we on these local charities, and do we analyse that as a kind of form of risk in the sense that if we're so reliant on the voluntary sector, is there the risk that could just, or not just say sort of stop the next day, but do we look at that as a kind of form of risk within the strategy?
When we started thinking about drafting a tackling poverty strategy, we went out into the VCS. We started off really kind of quite curious, because there isn't a tackling poverty strategy for England, so we were kind of finding our way into these kind of waters. One of the things that we found really quickly, as part of working with the voluntary and community and charitable sector, is that what we were collectively trying to address was actually part of their manifestos, for want of a better phrase, within their own organisation. So we coalesced because our ambitions and our aims were the same. And that's really how the Hardship Alliance was born, and then the Hardship Alliance Action Group, because actually what we were trying to achieve was the same thing. I think there's always a level of risk when you're working with any organisation. Of course, we do have a risk and issues log, as you would expect, and that's something that we would monitor on a regular basis. What I would say is, as Rachel mentioned, we undertake and support the voluntary and charitable sector in a number of different ways, and where we are relying on them, where they've described for some of these services, they are commissioned services for the examples that we've given through the report, and obviously that commission service has an element of funding that goes with it, and it also has KPIs built into it, so we have those measures of success, but also because it is seed funding, we have that sustainability, so we measure not just the activity they're taking to set up, but we have KPIs built in that measures the sustainability of that kind of one-off investment.
Yeah, I mean, what you've seen in the report is just the tip of the iceberg as well. So as we know, there's lots of different voluntary charitable organisations across Wokingham and neighbouring boroughs that work cross borders. There are no borders. So this is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's some really good work happening outside as well as inside the commissioned realm that we've been talking about soon.
Lou, did you have a question? No. Any more questions? Good. Right. Do we have any sort of resolutions from that? Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I think that's it. We can go on to the forward. Lost it. Executive Forward Programme. I note that the first page is about the meeting that's happening tomorrow. Yes. Yeah, Neil wants to say a few words about it. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
Just to explain why this report is on the agenda, it comes on a regular basis. I think it reflects part of the early discussion about horizon scanning. It just gives details of what's coming to the executive over the next few months, and it's here in case members want to highlight any particular issues or items which may benefit from a look from Scrutiny.
Could I ask that before Stephen leaves, the executive the executive forward programme shows school places, and I noticed that's not on the agenda for this week's executive or tomorrow. Is that moving to the next month? WBC 1422.
To be able to say, yes, you're right. It's not on the agenda for tomorrow evening. I'm not quite sure why, but it will be addressed at a subsequent executive meeting. I'm quite sure of that. We have got quite a full agenda for tomorrow, but that item is clearly not there.
Yeah, the forward programme did have a huge amount on it, so I'm not too surprised.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything more you want me to add? If I have permission to go.
Thank you.
You may.
Better be quick. So has anybody got any other comments about the other executive meetings? September and November. Pauline.
Given the time it's taken and the furore it's caused, I'm wondering if we should ask for the playing pitch strategy before it ends up at executive. The WBC 1421, which was meant to be originally was planned to be September last year, I believe, and is very, very contentious with the public. So I'm just wondering if that's one that would be worth having a quick look at.
I think that's on the work programme for community and corporate before it goes to executive.
It's on there, yeah.
I should know that really, shouldn't I?
Because I think it's the next meeting.
I think it would be, yeah.
Second of September. Yeah, it's the next meeting.
Let's move on to agenda item 12, the work programmes, overview and scrutiny work programmes. And I think Neil was going to say something about this.
So this report comes every year to this committee. It's a bit late this year because of various election problems, opportunities. So there are various appendices. Appendix A just is a suggestion of a work programme for each committee, and each committee will then consider whether it wants to add or detract from what's on that appendices. Yep. Then as part of this process, we ask the public and we ask town and parish councils if they have any suggestions, and they always do. And those are set out in Appendix B. So I would suggest that we forward those on to the appropriate committee. Then the final recommendation, I think early part of this year, there was some discussion about realigning some of the work programmes so that Community and Corporate Scrutiny Committee would have more of a focus on place and growth services. And if that members are happy with that, then their workload would be too big if they did budget scrutiny as well. So the suggestion was that this committee might take on the budget scrutiny, because one factor in that is that this committee has all the scrutiny chairs on it. So I think those are some of the salient points, and I can see hands going up.
But I was just going to.
So forgive me. Dave played a new boy card for this council. I'm always nervous. I hear, so I don't mind the realignment, and this isn't because I want more work for the scrutiny committee I'm a chair of, but I still would like, I'd still like personally on the my scrutiny committee to look at the budget areas that are impacted, that come under my scrutiny area, even if it's, when it comes to management committee, it should almost be the roll up of what everyone has said in their own sections. I'm not trying to stifle debate on it, far from it actually. I think it's important that each of the overview and scrutiny panels actually scrutinises their own budget areas. And even if that means that the budget discussion is only focused on the areas that are relevant to that committee, and then this becomes the roll-up function. I know that's going to cause more work for members of the committees. I just feel that it loses some of that link if we're kind of moving it down further into this group here. I know there'll be lots of discussion elsewhere, but whilst I don't mind changing the focus to places and growth, I still want to make sure that we're getting that view of the budget process for that area of the council. Apologies. Anyone else going to make that point?
Pauline.
I think I would fundamentally object to doing that. I agree with you, Mark. I would object to moving it to Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. We formulated the membership of these committees based on the fact that Overview and Scrutiny Community and Corporate was going to do the budget. If you want to change what Overview and Scrutiny Community and Corporate does, you should have done it before we agreed who was going to be on it, not afterwards. And I think we should leave it as it is, at least this year. If you want to change it next year, then change it and then let us put the right people on the committees at that point. I also think Overview and Scrutiny Management is far too loaded with the chairs of the committees, so it's not very representative of the rest of the members of the council. So that also means it limits the amount of people who actually get a chance to scrutinise the budget outside the current ruling group.
Can I just add to that point? I wholeheartedly agree with Pauline there. The fundamental purpose of these committees is to provide scrutiny, and putting the right people on those boards is a key part of that. And if you change the goalposts after that process has happened, you're undermining the level of scrutiny that can happen.
Sorry.
Just to add the point, I think, again, agreeing on what we're saying, it says, when you scrutinize, you want to scrutinize all aspects of that particular issue. You don't want to say, okay, I'll scrutinize this, but I want to scrutinize that. And finance is part of that, whatever the issue is as well. So if you're going to do a proper scrutiny of something, you need to look at all aspects of that. And finance is a very important part of that. Therefore, it makes sense to actually stay in those individual scrutiny committees.
Anybody else? Does that leave what is currently called community and corporate with too much to do, or think it's?
Well, can I suggest that we, if that is the will of the committee as has been expressed, that we could take that away and come back to the next meeting with a further paper setting out how it might work?
Sorry, I think the people who've spoken have been quite clear about their views, which is that we don't agree.
Sure.
So I don't want to see another paper that just sets out why we should agree.
No, I think it was more about looking at the workload of community and corporate and not overloading it and seeing how we can make it streamlined so it works as across the different committees. That was my thought.
Yeah, thank you, Neil.
Neil, so just the avoidance of that means keeping the budget area within that committee purview, looking to take some other aspects out. Okay.
So could I ask for some clarification? What is it that you feel corporate and community are gaining by having the people in place? Because as far as I was aware, that was the committee that looked at all of those matters.
Yeah, I think it was absolutely kind of building on what I've seen the last year, having started here. And then some papers did go to this meeting related to place and growth, but most of the papers were going to community and corporate. And it felt community and corporate actually was a really good place to have, to use your, I think another councillor mentioned, to have an oversight of place and growth functions in one. Like you've got, children's, you've got a place and growth kind of real focus, because I think you can join up issues that you've seen in one item to another one. So I think we're building on what has been had in the past. The question for us is, should that finance paper go to this committee, or should it sit with the community and corporate? And you've been very clear about you want to get to that meeting.
It seemed to be presented that because corporate and community were gaining a lot of extra areas to look at, they wouldn't be able to cope with examining the budget as they had in the past. So what I'm asking is, what are these extra things that are being given to it?
They're all in that forward plan. And if you look at that forward plan, you'll hopefully see a really, and I won't be shy about saying this, a really extensive overview and scrutiny approach, with all of those matters being really important factors for you to work through. So, those are all, what we've tried to do this year is make sure that you have a very full programme related to the most important issues. Hopefully we've captured those. You'll have a view on that, I'm sure, along with the parish and town council comments. But yeah, we felt there may be some opportunity to move that budget. That's clearly not the case, certainly not this year, and we'll continue on that. As you say, council, we may have to shift things around to make sure you've got adequate space to go through the budget carefully on the 12th of November.
Pauline.
I'll defer to Alison, who knows far more about overview and scrutiny management than I have, having chaired it, I think. But generally, the community and corporate things that go to overview and scrutiny management are things that have got a pan organisational interest. And that's so I honestly don't think there is a problem in community and corporate. If I was going to reduce, I could take some of these out that are less important than others quite easily. And I think we should stick with what we've got, and if we find there's a problem, we should prioritise what we've got.
So,
I think that's generally the will of the committee, that the budget, I've not heard anyone, there's only a couple of us here, but I'm not sure that anyone would object on that from the rest of the committee. I think there's probably a wider conversation about which parts of the budget go where for the future. Which I think picks up on a comment. I can't remember if Alison made it, or Dave made it, or Pauline made it, but for the future time or the next round of budget setting, actually look at, you know, does each individual scrutiny committee have its own budget section, and so it brings the workload down. But my view is it stays as is, and then we just manage the work programme accordingly.
Yes, and I think we need to bear in mind that any changes to the committee remits should be made before the end of the year, so that the appropriate people can be appointed to those committees for the following year. Yeah. I'm seeing lots of nodding. So.
The timing of all of the elections this year, I think, have caused inevitable delays in timing. And I think for next year that needs to be set, as you say, the right moment in time.
Yeah. To make it absolutely clear, I don't think it's the right thing to do anyway, regardless of time. But
okay. Got to the end yet? Right.
Sorry, there's a further point, not necessarily for George. I think it's just the way that we do that, where we get in the public comments from the council, from the local parish councils. I think when you look down through the themes that come from it, there are some issues that kind of run across a number of the topics that have been raised by the parish councils and others. What I think might be useful for the next time we do this is if, when we get this summary report back, that we can then see, can we group any of the, take all the comments in a list, but can we map them into where that might go and where we can group topics together? There's quite a few comments on here about literal lighting. That kind of lends itself to sort of different areas of work for projects to have a look at. And I think it would help us to kind of work out these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, 6 pages, maybe, of comments and feedback from the parish councils, actually group it together more logically. And I think that would enable us to go further. That might not mean we specifically answer Woodley Town Council's point on its own, but the comments that are being made by the councils are kind of grouped together as a theme, and that the councils then can see that their actions are taken in into the work programme, even if it's not addressing the specific thing that they've raised. As an observation.
Lou.
Sorry, I think this is a very quick comment. Unless I've missed it, I didn't see anything from Wokingham Town Council, and I'm, as a Wokingham Town Councillor, I'm fairly sure we did give feedback.
I will check and confirm that with you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Can I,
Pauline?
Yeah.
Thanks. If we just go through this list as well, before we start bringing it all back to scrutiny, a lot of it's got nothing to do with scrutiny at all. It should be looked at by the directors, and they should look at the issues that the councils have raised and try and sort them out. A lot of this has got absolutely nothing to do with scrutiny. It's just their only way of bringing them up. So if I could ask that happens before we get it back.
Thank you, Pauline.
Alison, comment that this is quite unusual in my experience, that we've got only one suggestion from a resident, some from councillors, and then quite a lot from the town and parish councillors. And I just wondered, Neil, why you thought we had less from only one from residents. Did we follow the same process of encouraging residents to propose areas for scrutiny?
I think that we used less social media this time, which probably explains why we had less comments from residents. But we definitely put it out there to the public, and we did get some response, but as you say, not as much as in previous years. Which could be a learning point for next year, along with everything else we've discussed.
Okay, can we go on to draft work programme? We only seem to have one meeting after this one on our overview and scrutiny management. We've got the September one.
Thank you. I'm not sure where it comes up, but I raised a potential subject that I'd like covered in Overview and Scrutiny Community and Corporate, and it was agreed and referred here, and I'm just not sure whether that was under agenda item 12 or whether.
About the charities sector.
It's in here somewhere.
Yeah, can you go through it? Have you got it written down, or yeah? Well, Mark's frantically looking.
I swear blind, I've seen it in the report.
Shall I read it out?
I can read it out if you like. Yeah. Pauline has written, I would like to have a review of our allocation of resources, e.g. grants, buildings, manpower, facilities, to charities, to assess whether it's cost effective, fair, even-handed and divided up in line with the Council's stated objectives, poverty, inclusion and equality, the relative need, e.g. our position in ONS league tables, and the objective of the particular source of funds. I would like to understand how the Council is meeting the needs of the charity sector in Wokingham. 2, how is the Council certain that it is meeting the needs of each charity across the sector? 3, who is monitoring the impact and balance of the Council's support, i.e. provision of funds, use of Council property, promotion, etc.? How is the Council ensuring that the direction of its support is appropriate and that stated need is verified? 5, how the Council is assessing whether the support is the most effective way of achieving the objective and whether grants are in line with the objectives set out for the money, e.g. use of funds allocated for the relief of poverty in Wokingham Borough. I did talk to Rachel Bishop-Firth about this, and in fact, she was going to address it. Unfortunately, it's got left until she's left. On 1 and 2, we felt that it's not actually that the Council is meeting the needs of charity sector, that the charity sector is helping us meet the needs of. Yes, you can explain.
So we've heard tonight of a lot of different areas where the Council is providing resources to charities to make sure they meet our objectives, help us meet our objectives. What I'm asking to do is make sure that those resources are being put in the right places, that they're being used effectively, that we're getting the most bang for the buck, and that we're actually spreading them in proportion or in reflection of the need in the borough. So we're not just spending it all in one area, all in another area, and ignoring some areas that have got significant need. So that it's about understanding. We spend a lot of money and it's really good value. So I'm not trying to reduce it or anything like that. What I want to do is make sure we get the most value from it and that we meet as many of the objectives as we can, as properly as we can, and that we're not leaving something out or misaligning stuff or just spending the money where it's easiest to spend it rather than where it's most effective.
I only saw this about 24 hours ago. I don't know whether that was when you sent it, but I just got the feeling that this was just like any other procurement. I mean, we're procuring services via charities. Is that what's different about it?
We've got a limited and finite resources, whether it's buildings, whether it's manpower, whether it's effort, whether it's money. We have to make sure that we get the best value and the best outcome from that money in line with the issues in the borough. So what I want to understand, and I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not saying it's right, I want to understand that we understand that the money we're spending has the best effect. So we're not, for instance, spending all our money on, I don't know, old age people's homes, for instance, when there's a huge issue with poverty and there's a shortage of something that we're not funding. So I'm not saying that's just an example, so we're aligning our spend with the issues rather than just spending on the things that are easy, and that we're actually then spending the money that we are spending on particular areas on the right things to have the maximum effect. Yeah, that's what I'm after. It's not just about procurement, it's about prioritisation, and it's about making sure we get the best amount of effect for the money that we spend and the resources we spend and the manpower that we provide.
Well,
could we give this to officers to have a think about?
Sally is going to she's probably presenting a report in the autumn. Is that what you were saying earlier?
I think, yes, that's a good suggestion. We'll take it away and discuss with the officers and Councillor Bishop-Firth, and then bring it back in due course into the work programme.
Maybe you'd like to include me as well, because I actually know what I wrote.
I was including you.
I think just to point, the way I've understood, I know you explained it, it's definitely, I don't see it as a procurement issue, it's a value for money issue. Whether what we're doing and providing, to charity, are we getting the best value for that? It's effectiveness, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So just to be clear on that.
Sorry. Well, I think it is, because I think Sally was is planning to bring something to. She said autumn, so maybe she didn't mean September, but maybe she meant November.
If there's any consolation, I think it's something that I'd prefer done properly than in a hurry. So I prefer to give her the amount of time to actually come to the answer that is actually the right answer, rather than rushing it and ending up with something that doesn't add any value.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Okay, Andrew.
I was just going to add, I think just related to that, I think possibly those first two questions in that maybe are a little bit misleading. So I think I think it's those ones that you raised, which are how they're meeting the needs, but maybe if those are taken out, it might be a bit clearer actually what you want to get from it. Yeah.
Yeah, reword it and bring it back.
Well, I think it's flesh it out as a proper question. Yeah. I mean, I wrote these knowing what I meant.
Yes,
but I'm quite understand that somebody else might
them.
have interpreted them differently. Yeah.
So just on the point of this committee's next few meetings, can I suggest that I discuss with the chair and vice chair and draft something and then send it round to members, and we can confirm at the next meeting?
In terms of the scope of what we're going to do?
In terms of the general work programme.
There's only one more meeting list in the forward work programme for us, so we need that fleshed out for future meetings for the rest of the year in parallel with the rest of the committees. Yeah, that's what we're saying. Yeah.
And finally, the action tracker. So has anyone got any comments on the action tracker? Does this do we update this? I mean, do we start again this year? Is this the last one of last year?
Oh, we update it after every meeting, and members then get to comment on it at future meetings. Just keeps a running tally of where we've got to.
No. Everybody's lost the will to live. Okay, I think we've got to the end. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you all for coming.
Can I just check, at the September meeting, we'll be looking at the Q1 KPIs, will we? Because I didn't see the KPIs on
should imagine
any
so.
of our meetings.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry, quarter.
I think the answer is yes, but I will confirm to members.
We will be looking at them whenever they're available, will we? Thank you. And I presume the membership of this committee could change, since two committees haven't met to elect their chairman yet.
Yes,
It
that
Children-
could, in theory,
I'm quite,
yes, it could.
it's, I'm thinking the right word here. The fact that Children's Services overview and scrutiny aren't meeting till September is quite concerning.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very, very important committee, and climate emergency does meet next week, so that's something. But I think I just wanted to share my concerns with overview and scrutiny management about children's not meeting till September. I was surprised it wasn't put in for July. I know the 25th of June meeting obviously was postponed as within the election period, but I thought one would have been put in for July.
I'll take that back and speak to the powers that be, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for coming.